George Jones's fans didn't know he'd never take the stage again, but he did. The country legend walked off stage that night and said, "I gave him hell," before coming home to enter a hospital the very next morning. In the weeks that followed, there'd be signs that everything was not okay, but given his history, including his recent history, we all dismissed it as old no-show strikes again. Besides, those 2 mid-April shows were just postponed. If it was that dire, he'd cancel, right? I'm Billy Dukes, and it's been a decade, so I'll remind you the details. On Friday, April 26, 2013, George Jones died of hypoxic respiratory failure, a condition that occurs when there's too little oxygen present for the body to carry out basic functions. It was a very sad day in country music history. If you've ever seen footage of Vince Gill losing it while he sings "Go Rest High on That Mountain" with Patti Loveless at the Opry, you remember it was from Jones's memorial. We all thought he had more time. Well, most of us thought so anyways. Here is the list of dates George had put together for his ambitious grand tour. The 2012 and 2013 trek was to be his last tour, capped off with an all-star celebration in Nashville on November 22nd. We've highlighted the dates that George never lived to see. There's 15 of them total. That includes that all-star celebration, one that featured a lineup that'll just tear you up on its own. I mean, all of these artists have since passed on, and another, Randy Travis, was supposed to be the show's main act, but he suffered a stroke that summer, weeks after recording this special George Jones tribute.
Boys, tonight I'm playing possum.
George helped plan it all, knowing he'd never make it, and that's not us speaking. Talking to WSMV TV in Nashville the days after Jones's death, his wife Nancy admitted everyone close to him knew his health was fading fast. Quote, "He was so proud that he kind of kept it away from everyone and just would try to do the best he could with what was going on. He was a very, very brave man." So, April 6th was it, and looking back, there were signs. A website called Inside of Knoxville reviewed the show and pointed out that before George took the stage, they played a music video by singer Eric Lee Bedingfield for a song called "The Gospel According to Jones."
Saint Hank and Saint Lefty, Brother Whalen, they've all done passed on.
Here's the part that gets me. A heavenly light pours through the windows, and George stands up to leave. At the Knoxville Coliseum, Jones took the stage, and he struggled. Quote, "It was clear his pain was severe. He stood, sat in a low chair, tried a high chair, and generally could not seem to find a position that didn't hurt," the review reads. As for his voice, it was weak, but at times you'd hear his classic snarl. Setlist FM has George's final setlist from the night. It was short and punchy with just 11 songs, but included many of the favorites like the Grand Tour, Choices, and of course, He Stopped Loving Her Today. Yep, He Stopped Loving Her Today was the final song Jones would sing, which fits just right. There's one more heartbreaking layer to this story that you need to hear, but thumbs up this video if this moment choked you up, and please consider tapping the subscribe button for more secret history of country music videos. We dropped our video exploring the disappearance of another country legend in the corner. Barbara Mandrell had it all, and then she just quit. Why? I mentioned earlier that Jones was, by this point, a pretty tough man to count on. During the previous 18 months, the George Jones concert felt like a 50-50 proposition. There were a ton of headlines like this, and this. Although by mid-2012, his wife Nancy said he was, quote, "feeling great." Telling Country Weekly, he said to tell everyone he don't need no rockin' chair. Taste of Country covered George's life and career at the time and even took one of his last interviews. There was a lot of worry, but no alarm bells. Even on April 18th, he was said to have been hospitalized after a routine checkup that revealed a slight fever and irregular blood pressure. They were keeping him for observation, his publicist said. Once again, quieting any fear his contemporaries didn't even know.
I didn't even know that George was in the hospital. To the whole music industry, it's just going to be, a big void not having George out there. But, we've got his music, and that music will live forever. And
Alan Jackson was one of the stars who spent significant time with George before he died.
I've met a lot of people, artists and writers and music industry people, but that I never, of course, would have ever gotten close to or had opportunity. George Jones, he's always been real nice and respectful.
The tributes poured in.
He stopped loving her today. They placed a wreath on his door.
Well, TV never knew us to such a one place where it made us through. Never looking down and looking, but my fabric kept on looking safe.
The most special memory was when he gave me my medallion at the Hall of Fame ceremony. He actually was the one that did the actual induction, and what a special night that was.
His public memorial came on May 2nd and featured performances from Alan, Randy Travis, Vince Gill, and more. During CMA Fest that year, Nancy sat on a panel and revealed her husband's final words. He was alert until about 6 hours before he passed, but all at once he jolted and said, "Hiya, I've been looking for you. I'm George Jones." I believe he was introducing himself to God, she shared. There was that one more show. It was a chilly Friday night, but the room was packed. In fact, all that remained for this show was the $1,000 VIP packages available through GeorgeJones.com. This got you a little pre-show celebration and a ticket to see over 70, yes, I did say 70, country hitmakers gathered to give a proper send-off to the possum. Vince Gill would sing the Bartender Blues that night. Blake Shelton and Miranda Lambert would sing These Days I Barely Get By. And George Strait delivered the Grand Tour.
There's her rings, all her things.
Yes, sir. The final George Jones concert was one for the ages. It ended with a Jones on stage, helping the crowd through his most famous song. Send a kind word or a prayer to Nancy and the kids in the comments section below. There is no doubt they still miss him every single day. Rest in peace forever, George Jones. I'm Billy Dukes, and this is Secret History of Country Music. Consider tapping subscribe as I'm joined by my frequent podcast co-host, Adison Haager, to answer questions you might have about George Jones's life and death. Hey, Adison.
Hey, Billy. I loved getting to hear specifically, like in this entire video, I loved hearing the audio clips of George Strait and Alan Jackson. I feel like I haven't gotten to hear like true just like interview clips from them, honestly, recently at all.
Gosh, I can't tell you the last time I've heard Alan Jackson or George Strait. I guess Alan Jackson went on TV when he announced he was retiring from touring, but George hardly does any interviews. But you're right, those were gems, and I was happy to stumble upon those. And George Jones died recently enough that like record labels started producing audio clips for the radio stations to sort of, they service them to radio basically so that radio has some audio clips and some information to sort of support their coverage of an important death like this. So George Jones, George Strait and Alan Jackson, both part of UMG Nashville. I was able to go to the UMG Nashville prep site, type it in, and boom, out popped those. I mean, those clips were gems. I thought they were great and offered, I think, kind of some surprises in their own right.
Well, yeah, because I think for me, and I'd love to just hear your take on this, I thought it was very interesting. You know, I understand a little bit maybe why George Jones didn't want the public to know. You know, it's one of those of, do you want to be showing up to your shows and people, it's more of a mourning before you've even, you know, passed away type of a thing. And so maybe it's like, that's why he didn't want fans to know. But to not have, and I'm not saying, you know, maybe him and George Strait weren't, you know, BFFs for life or anything like that, but still, I would think maybe that inner circle in the industry, you maybe want to know, but as you heard that clip, he didn't.
Yeah. It's almost like you think there's like this sort of text thread amongst legends where like you have to be in the Hall of Fame to be a part of it. So everybody just kind of knows. And I think in a lot of the ways there is, like a lot of that might run through the Country Music Hall of Fame. So they kind of know what's happening maybe with some of the different members and kind of what to expect. And if there's going to be a passing to maybe clear their space for a funeral. But there wasn't any of that. I think Alan Jackson probably did know because he and George Jones were very close. Maybe Vince Gill knew, and we'll talk about why in a little bit. George Strait, maybe he's like on that second or third ring because he clearly was just like a lot of us waylaid by the death of
Yeah.
George Jones 10 years ago.
Why do you think that he didn't have those people know? Or
Well,
what
I
is
think
your
you hit the nail on-
hypothesizing? Yeah. Obviously we don't know, but
Yeah. Nancy Jones has provided a lot of information and she's been very generous, but she hasn't answered all the questions and it's not her responsibility to necessarily do so. I think George Jones wanted to keep it a secret just for what you said. Like, he didn't want to be playing shows with everybody knowing he's dying. And then it kind of becomes like this weird, almost memorial and not necessarily a concert. But he probably also wanted to have some of those final days, hours, and weeks just with his family. Just with his closest friends, as opposed to having like a parade of celebrities coming in and out of this hospital room, because then it would have caught on. Someone would have figured out, oh my gosh, there's George Strait, followed by Alan Jackson, followed by Randy Travis. Something's obviously happening in this hospital. You keep it tight. You have a lot of family members coming through. You get to spend that QT with them. And also it kind of helps keep a secret that had to have been really tough to keep, not only for George Jones, but his entire family. No one spilled.
honestly impressive.
Yeah.
Wouldn't you think? Yeah. Do you think when he was creating, obviously, like, he created the full, it was his last, like, everyone knew it was going to be his last tour.
Right.
But do you think that he created, obviously his health this wasn't out of nowhere. He'd been in poor health for a while now. So as you're creating this tour, do you think he knew, he didn't make it to any of the April dates, April on. So do you think he knew, I'm not going to make it to those, and still set them? You know what I mean?
I'm a little bit split on this question.
Okay.
And here's why. Like, it was very clear, like, he was working hard those last years. Like, he was playing a lot of shows, and he tried to get to as many of them as possible, and what other kind of condition he was in. If he could perform, he was going to show up and take that stage. So for him to have that attitude, but then also plan shows that he didn't think he'd get to, like, those are almost kind of, that's like a conflict of ideals there. So do I think he knew he wouldn't get to those shows? No. Maybe he figured it out pretty quickly that he overbooked himself in some sort of sense. I don't think he would have booked shows and sold tickets and gone through all that if he didn't think he could have gotten there. But that being said, I mean, this is hindsight speak, he might have been a little optimistic.
Yeah. Gosh, I can't even imagine, like, that thought process of, each night that you're performing, this sounds really heavy, but it kind of is heavy in the sense of, like, you don't know if it's going to be your last, Yeah.
No, I totally do. I haven't experienced anything similar, I guess, but I think it probably gave him the motivation to kind of leave it all out there each and every night and give everything he had. But he also probably came to peace with it. And, there was a little bit more evidence too that he was aware that he wasn't going to make it through 2013. I think Nancy Jones ended up being sort of the source where she revealed months later that George knew when he walked off that stage, it was likely his final shows and his time was close. But, not long before that, he had to have a conversation with his 13-year-old adopted son and let him know that he was going to be the man of the house now. And this really struck me. Several months later, after his passing, we learned that George Jones wrote a letter to his unborn granddaughters. Could have been great-granddaughters. Wow. But he knew he wasn't going to see these little girls. And I say girls because they were twins. There was a pregnancy. These babies ended up being born about 3.5 months after his passing. He knew he wasn't going to live to see them. So he wrote them a letter to be opened up at the appropriate time. They're now 10. So maybe they've had a chance to read through that, maybe not. But we never found out what was inside that letter. But George, he wanted them to know who their papa was, or at least maybe pass on some lessons he had learned. And that's touching. I mean, that's what a treasure. What a treasure those girls are going to have. And it's just theirs too, and they don't have to share that with anybody if they don't want to.
Well, and something just kind of speaking on his family after, watching this video, and then I kind of just did my own research on the side, and I was reading this article where, his wife was saying that, it got to a point where she was telling George, like, hey, you're pushing yourself too hard. You know what I mean? He was really struggling towards the end, and it was almost like why are you pushing yourself so hard? Like, you can take a break. You don't need you have nothing to prove, maybe is the best way to say that. And but that she was saying that he wanted to push himself because he wanted people to know that he wanted his fans to know that he loved them so much. And this is not necessarily even a question for you, but just a thought that went through my head was did his family feel like he loved his fans more than them, that almost maybe that they were robbed of time because he's like, no, instead of spending these last little moments with my family, I've got to prove, or, I want my fans to know that I love them. I don't know. Like I said, I don't have a question to that, but that was just something that definitely just kind of ran across my mind as I was reading and then watching the video.
Yeah, it's certainly, it would be easy to understand if some members of his family did sort of think or feel like that. I mean, it's a little bit of a selfish sort of perspective, but we are selfish beings. I think you know who you married, though. I think you know who your father was. Like, I think you know who your grandfather was, and he wanted to go out working. I mean, think about it. If you're of that age, you're in pain, you're in poor health, what are you going to do? Just sit around telling your family about how in pain and how bad you feel? So he wanted to get to work and show his fans. I wonder this as well. Like, if a certain amount of him wanted to, because he had such a legacy of like the old no-show and not making shows and being too drunk to play back in the 70s, 80s, and during those rougher years. If he was trying to maybe do right by some fans who might have had a sour experience from him decades previously, I do kind of wonder if there was a little level of guilt there where he kind of wanted to go out giving everything he had to those fans that maybe he had let down in some ways.
His reception is not the correct word. His what am I looking for? His tribute service,
memorial.
I guess. Yeah, thank you. Memorial. Yeah. That's the word I was looking for. His memorial. Yeah. Watching that, I know we only played a clip in the video of Vince Gill singing, but I watched that full thing. Seeing Vince get so choked up, was he super close to George Jones?
Yeah, really? Vince and George Jones were, and Vince cries just about every time he plays "Go Rest High on That Mountain," doesn't he? Like, and I've often kind of like wanted to ask Vince about that, like how much of a burden that song is, because he knows every time he plays it, he's going to take that song on and break into tears. But this particular performance, I mean, he was not able to get through it, and he was leaning on Patty Loveless, and nearly physically leaning on Patty Loveless. Like, she really had to kind of carry that song, and it was such a moment. And then kind of in the middle of it, and I get chills thinking about it, but there was no explanation for it. But the camera pans to Garth Brooks as he's standing up right in the middle of Vince Gill's performance. And it's not like the preacher just walked in, or the body was being carried in. It was just sort of a random time for Garth to stand up. And then everybody around Garth Brooks stood up, and Vince and Patty kind of made it through the rest of their performance. But it was a surreal moment that was 100% appropriate, but no one would have scripted or predicted that was going to happen.
Totally, because it's not like he stood up during the chorus or any sonically, when it came to the song itself, there was no reason for him necessarily to stand up. I think how I took that as I was watching it was one of those, like, an unspoken physical way to show. I don't know if Garth and Vince are, buds outside of the music world, but how I took that was Garth saying without words, hey, I'm here for you. I see that you're struggling through this. I'm also hurting, but it's almost as if I'm staying on stage with you, holding you up, but obviously physically not doing that. But that was kind of his way of showing, like, hey, I got you. You got this.
I think you're absolutely right. I think that's what it was. I would never have thought to do that, but I think that's what it was. And at least helped him get through the song and through the moment.
Was there any tribute performance? I don't know if you physically got to go to any of them or anything like that. Is there a tribute performance that you saw then that even seeing now still gives you chills?
Alan singing George Jones is a really special thing. Like, there's this clip from like the 80s when Alan Jackson was known as Al Jackson. He wasn't a recording artist yet. And he stands up and, like, to take like this Star Search type show to commercial. They're like, and now we're going to go to Al Jackson. And he's in the crowd and they give him a microphone. And wouldn't you know it, he sings, "He stopped loving her." Yeah, that's the song that Al Jackson chose. And it's always just seemed like just a natural fit when Alan Jackson sings George Jones. So those are the ones I would say.